Eric,
Omar.
once again, I'm in some sort of undisclosed location. Isn't it weird that it seems like my backdrop changes every single week?
All I know is that I'm just glad you have a backdrop this week because I had a sense of loneliness in our last episode. I'm not sure if I can pin down why I felt that way, but it just wasn't the same last week.
I was there. I was definitely there. My
Eh.
my video feed cut out, but I think if you listen
Yeah.
to the audio feed, I was definitely there.
Oh, maybe that's the issue. The weird thing is I actually wasn't even on Skype. I was just doing a recording of video and then my audio. So when you say you were on,
Yeah.
on what?
Just on it. And that's why
It.
no wonder my contributions, which were understandable because, you went right into everything like training specificity, diet breaks. I didn't hear them. And that was curious, but understandable because sometimes Brandon, our editor, makes these choices, editing, the art of it. There are Oscars after all for that category. Yeah, but I was there. It's just like, 2011, Eric, man, your 2011 competition, it was called the
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, but man, you just got to start the first letter.
The first letter.
Yeah,
That's all you need?
of the state, Colorado, right?
N. It starts with an N.
Nevada, bro. How can I forget?
You're on point. You were just a few states over. You're good to go. So
just like that. Anyways, just like that.
Gotcha. Well, now I actually feel bad because that means I completely talked over you for like an hour and 15 minutes.
Well, I was in a plane too, so that
Oh,
also I probably sounded garbled, so I wasn't really saying anything.
right.
Worth really listening to, but I do want to say I thought that was a fantastic episode. And maybe it was fun for me to be part of the cult then and listen to it and hear you give a masterclass on these topics. And this isn't me trying to shirk my responsibilities, but I wouldn't be opposed if down the road you had another solo episode. Because I think I've said this from the word jump. I don't think anyone does it better in terms of breaking down the information in an accessible manner. And I do think the tricky part becomes in many like podcasts, it doesn't matter like an audio format, that writing is a distilled practice, right? Where you take several hours or what have you to compose an article. When you do a podcast, it's live, it's dynamic, it's of the moment. So even if you do the very best job of reciting verbatim what you wrote down, is that the same thing? And does it provide any more utility? So I like how you'll get into a topic and then you'll provide extra caveats or considerations or things not covered in it. And then also, quite frankly, in ways that are usually more applicable to a listener, because now you're talking to an audience, as opposed to like if it's a maths article, what are you doing then? You're breaking down the research. And then there's that applicability at the end, what have you, but it changes it. So you navigate that, I think, real well. I'm done with the compliments though after this.
Well, thanks, man. And it might be worth talking a little bit about science communication and my experiences over the years, because you're right. Writing and talking about something are two pretty damn distinct skills. And I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back or anything, but I feel very fortunate that I have both. But I think because I have both skills at whatever decent degree they're both at, I definitely know better writers and I definitely know better presenters, that I'm good enough at both to recognize how different they are.
Yeah.
And in academia, I've met a ton of people who are on both sides of the fence. Like I've met some really freaking good teachers, right? Who their papers are not great, or they just don't write many. Like they've got like 2 publications, but they're like just crush it with like some exercise science class or teaching regularly. And on the flip side, there's people who are, this is probably more common, I'll be 100% honest. There are people who have written, they're the gal or the guy in a given area. They have 50 plus publications. Their writing is very solid. They're publishing in high impact journals. And, for anyone doing their master's or PhD in a remotely similar topic, they're like, oh my God, this person has done, a third of the work here, An example, like when I was doing my master's on protein, this is before I really knew much about him as a person, like, because he's relatively out there online. You can find him on podcasts and that. Stu Phillips. I was citing Phillips like all the time, And I've never had a class from Stu Phillips, so this is not at all about him. But there are some people with that kind of level of publication record who you'd be surprised are relatively dry in person. I don't think Stu's one of them, to be really clear. Like, he's done well on podcasts. But another interesting thing to add another layer to it, like when we had Ryan Lapidat on recently, he was expressing how announcing and commentating is different skill than podcasting. And I think podcasting is actually a different skill than lecturing. So the experience of doing a one-person podcast, I had to get myself in the right headset. You know, my first thing I told myself was, look, I'm going to record this. It's going to be probably an hour or longer, and it was. And I'm only going to do one take, and I'm going to think about what it is like in my history and my experience of when I guest lecture on a topic. Because I don't fret on those. Like, okay, I'm going in to teach to a class of, 20 or 30 undergraduate or postgraduate exercise science students on this topic. I need to make it relatable. They need to understand. I need to have a conversational tone with them. But ultimately, there's not a ton of back and forth. There's definitely more, when I go to a classroom, like I do ask them questions. I see where they're at. People who've been to conferences that I've presented at that are smaller, like your industry conferences where there's 20, 30, 40, 50 people, I would typically ask, like, who's in the audience? How many trainers are there? How many competitors are there? How many non-competitors? Okay, for all you trainers, what is the population you work with, et cetera, et cetera? Because then I can change my delivery of the topic based upon the listener.
Yep.
So it's not exactly the same, but I really tried to go into that episode with that mindset. And it was the first time that I've recorded a solo podcast, but it wasn't that different because, how many times do we have a really science heavy episode? Like, especially, like when we did, like, when you asked me about like protein, everything about protein,
Yep.
I was basically just like, oh, I'm just presenting, my area of expertise. It wasn't like you were not contributing, but you were the interviewer. You knew your role, and which is also a skill. Which, like Danny Lennon is the man with that, for example. But anyway, the point is, I sat down and I was like, all right, I'm going to try to have a conversation with the camera, which is definitely harder. To not having someone to put you at ease and to make it conversational. And I think the only thing that made it harder when I kind of flipped that switch and I'm like, okay, I'm guest lecturing, is that I have to create those moments where I decide where I should go on a tangent or not,
Yep.
and whether this is worth it, whether to provide that context. And then in real time, sometimes I have to think about the next thing I'm going to say, like, oh, what do I want to talk about next? But if, when you ask me questions, of course I listen, but at the same time, I'm also thinking about what other things should I go on, or what does that set me up for?
Yep.
And it's harder to do that while you're actively talking and teaching something else. So it was interesting. It was cool. And I think, though there will be times I could do that, just so long as I have some stuff ready to rock that is, kind of in my wheelhouse. And this week rather, it just so happened that I'm writing that to be released on the 1st. They'll be coming out in 3 or 4 days after this, or actually not that long, because there's only 28 days in February. It'll be like a couple days after this episode drops. My article in Mass on specificity will be out, which will also be free to read on Stronger by Science. And you can see that was it's not a review of a paper. It's just me going in on a topic. So I've been thinking a lot lately about specificity and how to articulate that. So that was easy. And then the recent diet break study is, an area of research that I've been personally involved in and I was interested in. So that was a relatively quick update. But I think I won't be able to do that regularly because I'm not always like, loaded up with stuff like that. But in the cases where I am, and you might be traveling or whatever, because we've tried to prepare the cult for this ridiculous schedule we got, then we can do that. But I do think, Omar, many times we're gonna be traveling together.
We're stuck together. As the film that we bonded over, that's definitely called Stuck Together. Don't look it up. Hopefully, it has been changed in our current timeline. I'm not sure which Earth we're in. We have in about a month we're going to be traveling together, and that's why I do have to give you even more props, because I said to you, it's very boring, but I'll disclose it. There's some stuff going on with Rascal, just moving the fulfillment plays, expansions, ambition, and we'll get into that because I want to talk about our training as an avatar, maybe for the average listener or like where we are in our journeys and so on and so forth. But ambition is certainly going to be one of the common themes, I think, in the conversation. But it tied me up a little bit, and due to the schedule and the time zones and the commitments and seeing this and that, I said to Eric, I said, hey, this might be one of the weeks actually where we have the bye week. And then Eric said, yeah. And then he said, actually, I could do, and then it worked out perfectly because, like I said, I think it's one of our best episodes. And as a side tangent, my favorite comment was the one about Knuckles, about also Knuckles, and now Trexler has his own. So that the Erics, as someone said, the Erics have liberated themselves from their like tyrannical like co-host or whatnot. And I thought that was very funny. Yeah, which is actually interesting. The fact that, as I understand it, like
Yeah, the timing.
yeah, Trexler's doing it, and then you did one. But unfortunately, we're traveling together, so it's about a month. And then, speaking of which, so I'll disclose because by the time, actually, unfortunately, by the time this episode comes out, Eric, I'll still be here. So I'll say I'm in Austin. So I am
Well, you'll be at
disclosing
risk for at least a day or two by disclosing this information.
But will we go there? I will. I actually won't say everywhere that we'll be traveling, but I think we'll be meeting up like 3 times this year. And also, one of the things, Eric, I was reflecting on. So, just very quickly, speaking about us traveling together, is how connected the community is. I have been essentially a hermit for the last several years, but I'll give you a very quick example. We're going to Sheffield. Imagine all the people we're going to meet. The people you're like, Jess, that you're coaching. Powerlifting America, the nationals is happening right now. Bryce Lewis, we'll get into that. That's one of your clients. All the fellow coaches, the colleagues that you have. So while we're traveling, just the in-person conversations, I do think, in my estimation, an in-person conversation will enhance that conversation by about 10%, just because in real time, the person's there. And all those subtle kind of body language cues that you read on someone else or the inflection that you hear perfectly as opposed to, the transmission of the whatever was said, there's a slight delay, so on and so forth, just does enhance it. And you feel that chemistry in person. So I'm excited for that. But as a side note, that's why Eric, his first time traveling in 3 years, I used to travel every year. And there's a kid, he won the 2019 USAPL, I believe, at nationals for the 60 some kg, Rodrigo Manzo. But he showed up to game day barbell because I'm training a game day barbell. And just the through threads of everything being connected where we started talking. And I remember, like, yeah, the stringer on, he did like the 500-pound. I had a deadlift challenge back in the day. Then he became the national champion. But now he's a coach. And the same idea, that's where we shout out some of the people that are now in academia. But just the willingness of this space, of particular people in this space to share information. I think it's never been at this point. And even as a small side note, that game day barbell that I'm now lifting at in Austin, that Joe Stanek and like Tim Thibodeau to open up, I never could have fathomed a facility like that 12 years ago. So I'm actually just very excited. Like, this feels not like a victory lap, but getting out again and seeing people and seeing what they've accomplished too. Where game day is like a third, and I'm done. I have no active promotion. I have no affiliation whatsoever. But it's like 13,000 square feet, Eric. I will not disclose what I think the actual value is of the equipment, and not that one needs all Eleco. And I'm not even that powerlifting snob that like I need the Eleco bar, I need the Eleco plates, and so on. But they have, Eric, I think there's like 100 red 25 Eleco plates, which is absurd. While I was lifting on one side, I counted 50 for sure. So I'll just do my sets. I was like, because I know each Eleco plate, folks, 25 kgs, whatever, at least $400, maybe $500, something like minimum. We can look it up, USD.
All I'll say is that I did not buy Eleco equipment for my home gym.
we both did. So
I got imitation Eleco combo rack.
Eleco.
Yeah.
But Eric, it's incredible. And they have Eleco racks and everything. Anyways, but like the amount of equipment they have is 13,000 square feet. Bro, they have 9 weightlifting platforms, all very good platforms. Also, Eleco bumper plates, strongman equipment, strong woman equipment, bodybuilding equipment. And this is like game day is an excellent facility, but I would estimate in the US, there are probably not quite to that level, but like several dozen. Man, a decade ago, none of that would be possible. So, anyways, I'm super excited for all that.
No, 100%, man. And it's really good to see you getting out and amongst the culture and the fact that we're not forced to not be able to do that because of COVID. And I'm looking forward to doing it with you. So yeah, now that you disclose the fact that you're in Austin, please find him.
Yeah.
And do what you feel you must. Either adore him or destroy him, whatever your fans think is appropriate. Austin, it's a small one-horse town in Texas, so he's in the motel that exists in Austin. I'm sure you could find him. Although at another second motel in Austin, I'm sure there's only two, maybe at most. Guess what's going down right now as we speak? Powerlifting American Nationals. And this is an interesting situation because it is only 4 weeks from the Sheffield, which we've talked about a lot. We went in on this recently with Ryan, but I think there's an interesting storyline developing right now. So the way you get a spot on the national team to compete at IPF Worlds is two ways, basically. One, you go to Powerlifting America Nationals, which is going on right now. As we record this, Bryce Lewis is competing tomorrow in the 93s. And you have to do two things. One, you can guarantee a spot by winning your class and hitting the Carpino 1 total, which is an average of the total which won your weight class at IPF Worlds over the last 3 years. That is, I think, 868.5 or something like that for the 93s. That's a really good total. And if you think about the last couple of years, we've had Keiko and Chance as the people who have won that. So they're also U.S. competitors. And another U.S. competitor who competed for Virgin Islands, but is now back with Powerlifting America, the IPF affiliate, Gavin Aiden. He has actually totaled 880 at I think a local meet. He hasn't done that at the national level, but when you're going head to head, sometimes you have to shoot for things that are outside of your grasp, and the totals at Worlds or competitive nationals don't necessarily reflect your best. They reflect the fight to win at that level. So anyway, an interesting thing about those three gentlemen, they're all competing at Sheffield. And the other way, if you don't go to nationals to get a spot on the national team, is to hit the Carpino 1 at the very least at a qualifying event. One of those, like I said, is Sheffield. However, for a national team, they can only have up to 2 lifters per weight class. So what we're looking at is potentially 4 gentlemen who are all capable of hitting the Carpino 1. Only one of them can win nationals, and then only one other person can go. So depending upon Bryce's performance tomorrow, it may be that now there's a lot riding on the Sheffield. Chance Mitchell, Gavin Aiden, as well as Jonathan Keiko are all fighting not only for who can beat the 93 kilo records for cash money, but also only one of them can get a spot at Worlds. So basically, whoever out totals the other 2 is pretty much guaranteed a world spot. Now, technically, you can't know with 100% certainty that America will send a second 93. But because the 93s are so competitive, and if you look at basically what happens is after you get the national champion, assuming they hit the Carpino 1 in each weight class, then you fill up the rest of the national team spots with the highest ranking Carpinos in a downward list as basically the alternates who would come in. So not everyone who wins nationals this weekend is necessarily going to hit the Carpino 1. A lot of them will on both the men's and the women's side, but not every single class. So that means that they're just going to be looking at, all right, who hits the highest Carpino? Because then it gives the America team the best chance of getting more points and securing the team victory. So almost assuredly, we're looking at 2 93s. There's also a possibility, which is very exciting. We could have 2 super heavyweights because Ray Williams is doing Powerlifting America's Nationals this weekend as well. So that'll be one to watch. And if he hits the Carpino 1, which right now, as best as we've seen, Ray is incredible. I mean, he's Ray Williams. He's not at peak Ray that we previously saw, totaling like 11, 12. He's in the mid 1000s right now. If he has a really good meet, which I think is very possible, he, I think, could hit the Carpino 1, which I think is around mid 1000s total. So it's very possible Ray, because no one else is going to beat him. He's almost assuredly, unless he bombs out, going to win the supers, the 120 plus class at nationals. So he's going to fulfill that first criteria. If he also hits the Carpino 1, which will be the goal for the day, I'm sure, then he will secure a world spot. And then if Jesus does really well at Sheffield's, he's going to score very high on the Carpino rankings compared to everyone else. So it's possible that on the men's side, we could see 293s and 2 super heavyweights. And then Ray Williams and Jesus Olivares would be basically secured for the 1 and 2 spot, assuming no one bombs out in Malta at IPF Worlds in June, but also going head to head, although competing for the same country. And that'll be a very interesting situation. They're going to need 2 different game day coaches because they're both going to be going head to head, but also competing for America. And we're probably going to see a similar situation in the 93s, whether it's Gavin, Chance, or Keiko, with potentially Bryce, or any 2 of those 4 gentlemen are capable on any given day of winning worlds, of winning the national title, and setting, honestly, a world record in the 93 kilo class. So it's going to be very interesting. It's all good news for Powerlifting America, but it means that there's going to be extra pressure on these gentlemen at the Sheffield, because many of them are opting out of doing powerlifting. Like in many cases, they could secure the world spot by competing at nationals, but with it only being 4 weeks out from the biggest money meet of all time,
Yep.
they have to make this decision of can I peak twice, And sometimes the answer is probably not. And I don't want to put myself in a position where I have to try or even train through and be beat up, or maybe, not perform well and have that psychological effect and maybe physical effect, then impacting Sheffield. So it's going to be a very pressure-filled next month for the folks who are in those very competitive divisions and competing at Sheffield, and either deciding to or not to compete at nationals.
Eric, this is an episode all about ambition, because I find that astounding. One, Bryce Lewis, if he's listening, love you. And actually, this will be released on Monday, so I'm going to Powerlifting America's nationals, which would be for the Saturday one, which is when Bryce is competing, because I understand also what's going on right now, like the guy Rodrigo. There's people lifting right now. But it's crazy to me the level of athletes that have come about in the last decade, how competitive classes can be, where you can have these head-to-heads. I think that's something that we spoke about several years ago, not just about, the IPF, but the concept that in any sport, we like to see rivalries, right? We want to see people go head-to-head, and that gives a frame of reference in order to evaluate someone's actual performance. If someone is light years ahead, that can be exciting too, like a Usain Bolt, how they're just blowing past records. But usually things are contextual, where you want to understand, okay, so this person, that's why with Ryan Lapidat, when he explained it, the art of announcing, which it is a skill, how to frame things for the audience, it sets it up. You're basically the person that's just teeing up the ball so that when they see it get hit, they know what really is going on. So that's going to be exciting to see tomorrow. And I'm very curious how Powerlifting America sets up their meets. I've probably only been in like 20 some meets, which is like very low actually by a powerlifting enthusiast standard. I would say though, Eric, very interesting side note. We do not have to get into this at all, but we talk ambition, expansion, so on and so forth. Powerlifting America, the IPF, Sheffield. But I've heard a pretty damn reliable rumor. I'm not trying to spread this, and Brandon, we can absolutely cut this, but I find it interesting, and I have no dog in this race. Let me just say, I am, and I think that's there's power in being an amateur enthusiast, because you're not beholden to anyone, corporate interest, personal interest, affiliations, and so on and so forth. But I've heard, so USAPL now has their branch in Korea, right? I have heard that they're going to launch another branch in another nation that I'm familiar with. So it actually is attempting to become another like quasi IPF, and that's no shade, but I'm just saying, like, in terms of the ambition and the scope and so on, that I do like the concept overall. And this is the end of this part, because it's just a side note of I like to see the best compete. I remember the hypothetical conversations. Remember this, Eric, way back. So now we're going, man, I'm blanking on his name. You're going to help me remember it. Speaking of head to heads, but this is how much of an OG Bryce Lewis is. There was a conversation for a long time. The guy sings, Eric. You know who I'm talking about, with a squat. Going head to head with Bryce
Screamer.
Lewis. Well, what's his name?
You mean Screamer?
No, not Screamer Emmanuel. No, we're talking like 9 years ago. So he was a
9 years
squat.
ago.
Not that they're high. I'm a high squatter, but he very low bar. But the lifts were relatively the same. But they competed in different what do you call it? In different
Weight classes or federations?
Different federations, same weight class. Oh man, it's gonna bug me. I think Ben was his first. Ben, what's the other name?
I'm not sure who you're referring to be
Okay.
100% honest with you, unfortunately,
It's
Omar.
about if now we're talking like 9 years ago. Well, is one of the theoretical
So this is
matchups.
back when Bryce was in the 93s the first time.
Yes, yeah. So it's
Okay.
93. I'm probably this is
Hmm.
like 2013 or 14 because this is when I was like really into. But I remember the conversation. So a few years later, remember Brett Gibbs, John Hack, this weight class was going on. If only we could get them together because Hack at the time is competing in things like raw unity meets and so on and so forth. These matchups that people want to see, and I just wonder if that'd be healthy for the sport. Overall, he has a Twitch channel as well. I know this is terrible, but it's going to come to me. Um, if it's best for the sport to have this potential split that is occurring of some of the talent. Some of the weight classes, and as powerlifting becomes more and more international, the French lifters, as Ryan noted, there's many very fantastic, very strong French lifters that are coming out in many other nations. But I am curious, anyways, the implications and ramifications over the next several years. That's all I was going to say because I'm excited.
For
Powerlift
sure.
America, I want to see it. I'm in Austin. Great way to see nationals. Going to be a Sheffield, which basically is like another world class or then some level. And then my question I was going to ask you, Eric, as a coach, because some people might not realize this, and it sounds like we're getting into like the real nitty gritty of these competitions, but they are interesting because it sets up the game day strategy. So like the meet prep itself on game day, what you do. But not every nation has their nationals at the exact same time frame, exact same weekend. Like Canadian nationals, well, it was several weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago now, or
Last week.
roughly, yeah. Um, and so, we have the National Down Powerlifting Americas, which is the IPF, one for America. How would that change things, Eric? Is my question. Like, let's say
Mm,
Sheffield. Like Sheffield's an interesting one to meet, and that's why I bring it up. So it is a world qualifier, but it's in March. It's end of March, and now we have Worlds in June. And when you talk about the concept of like a double peak in a year, and now you don't have 6 months or 8 months, you have instead how long, right?
yeah.
Like how does that like so in terms of picking and choosing where to compete and how you even train the athlete? We don't have to get into again the nitty gritty of like, oh, like for Bryce, if he's going to Worlds and now he's doing this, I'll do this as an example. But as a coach, what are some considerations at that high of a level where I think what people might not realize, if you're still coming up in the powerlifting game, you could get stronger in several months and then peak for a meet and then hit the meet. But if you're at the level that they're at and your meets are too frequently, then you're, increasing load, you peaking for the meet. You have to do a deload a little bit. That's total time taken away from actually just the process of getting stronger, which takes longer and longer the stronger you are.
Yeah. No, it is a different. It is much more of a sport at a higher level rather than an opportunity to display your strength for fun
Yep.
with friends and family,
Yep.
which I still is the core of powerlifting. But a couple things, man. So one, we don't need to have Brandon delete it. It's not just a rumor. I don't think USAPL has been at all quiet about their intentions to go international.
Yep. Yep.
And they have the plans to have as many international affiliates as they can. And I think that's great. Um, the one downside, like you said, is that it does provide a potential dilution of the U.S. talent. So, for example, at the last Worlds, you had some competitors not going to Worlds because they stayed with USAPL. You had some competitors because of the split going to U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yep.
Like, for example, Gavin Aiden in the Battle of '93s, he was U.S. Virgin Islands last year. This year he'll be Powerlifting America, assuming he can get that spot. But he will be at Sheffield representing Powerlifting America. So there's been a rather tumultuous time with these splits, and we've talked about it. And if anyone wants to really get into the nitty gritty, check out our prior episodes, or actually check out King of the Lifts, and where they've talked about it. Ryan's done a good job with Arian and the other people who are like Arian's actually a national coach for Powerlifting America, so you can get some insight there. But yeah, even with these splits and this dilution, powerlifting has got to the point where it is, fivefold bigger in terms of athlete participation than it was 5 years ago, where I am having to do things that I didn't previously have to do nearly as much, like scouting and actively thinking about the game day aspects.
Yep.
So this is something I didn't actually think was going to come up on this episode. We didn't talk about it before we jumped on. I am currently reading Matt Gary, the honestly the best powerlifting coach arguably in our time at least, his new book that was just released on Game Day Meat Coaching. So Matt Gary Kai is going to have a link there. It just got released on Monday. He had a pre-sale beforehand. I had the unique honor and privilege of giving him some minimal guidance just on the prospect of releasing a book and to the same kind of community from my experience with the pyramids.
Yep.
And I really hope that was helpful to him, and hopefully it gets more uptake from that. Because honestly, to sell this as a game day coaching manual is, in my opinion, only partially accurate. I think it undersells it. He has elements of psychology. He talks about making weight. He talks about scouting, and he's got folks like Jason Tremblay helping with that. Kendrick Kwan helping with, who basically wrote the, with some input from Matt, of course, the making weight chapter. He's got a forward from Mike T, but it's like 180 pages. This isn't just like attempt selection and what's a chip, mean, and stuff like that, and what are the rules. This is all of that and so much more. And I'm going to be reading it like multiple times before Sheffield, and then again before Malta, because there's a very real possibility and probably likelihood at this point, if I was to say, that I'm going to have both Bryce in the 93s and then have Jess in the 76s, which are the two most competitive classes at Worlds. And at this level, Omar, it is, yes, the biggest advantage you can have as an athlete is being the strongest person. But the strongest person is not always the one who wins in powerlifting when we're talking about a spread of 5 to 10 kilos. And we're talking about the 2 or 3 strongest people in the world. It's the best powerlifter. The person who can make as many attempts as possible. The person who can, with collaboration with a game day coach, understand how to use a chip advantage. So, let's say this isn't something you can do if you have a really well-rounded lifter. Which Bryce is, for example. He rarely gets the opportunity for a chip because he's not going to be breaking the squat, deadlift, or bench world record, but he has broken a total world record in the past. He's just very well-rounded. But for example, with Jess, someone who is a deadlifter, heaviest deadlift on the women's side in IPF history, unequipped, she's in a position where it is intelligent to take a chip where she can, because she could potentially do it on the squat as well, because then another competitor, when they're trying to match her total, like let's say, Jess's total is 592, right? Or 593. They're going to have to go all the way to 595 to beat her. 592.5 doesn't beat 593, right? So having that chip advantage, even those few kilos, make a big difference. And for those people who think, oh, when does it ever come down to being that close in powerlifting? Dude, last year, when Leah Bavois didn't make weight, the top 3 in that weight class had the same exact total, and it was decided by body weight, So these types of decisions, when you have two opportunities to change your attempt on deadlift, and you can put in the change card, you can even put in a fake opener and then change it to try to get the other person to try to go with their plan A versus their plan B and maybe overextend themselves. All of that becomes a thing. Like for Sheffield, I have a spreadsheet that calculates the percentage for every single of the 12 women that are going to be competing actively, their ranking based upon, what the current world records are. And I've gone through many, many combinations. I've had to scout all 11 of the women because Jess is competing against all of them, right? It's all based upon ranking 1 to 12 of who beats the world record total by the most. And it's relatively easy for me to think about, okay, what shots at world records does Jess have for the squat, bench, and deadlift? And then, okay, what are good attempts to get there? And what's a plan A? What's a plan B? That's more like a normal meet, at a high level when you can actually break an international record. But for the rest of it, I'm thinking, okay, like what is Jad Jacob good for? Okay, what is Chandler Babb good for? Like these people who aren't even in the same weight class as Jess, I now have to think about what's going to happen with them on a good day based upon their recent performances. I'm going on open powerlifting. I'm going on Instagram. I'm making a spreadsheet. I'm trialing different numbers. And I have to have a decent idea of what kind of total does Jess need to be in that top 10 where you get paid out and not be, 11 or 12. And then what's the highest I can move her up without actually sacrificing, our game plan to go after potentially the squat and the deadlift world record.
Yep.
So, and more than that, like you were saying, the timing of competition. So last weekend, 7 days ago, Jess did nationals in Canada, right? Which was 5 weeks out from Sheffield. And that was like, or 6 weeks out. And that's very tight turnaround. That's why there's many people who are not doing PA nationals and only doing Sheffield. And they're somewhat rolling the dice with, am I going to get a world spot? Like I mentioned in the 93s, because, 5 weeks, if you think 6 weeks is tight turnaround, 5 weeks is tighter, right? And for some people, it's just too much. I think especially when you think about, on average, a super heavyweight is going to require a little less frequency, a little less volume, and a little longer turnaround time on recovery because the absolute loads they're handling, right? So, and also it's just hard to maintain body weight where it needs to be. Like eating is a job. So having to travel multiple times and compete multiple times, a guy like Jesus, I totally understand why he's just going, okay, chips are in for Sheffield, right? But there are ramifications of that, Now he's got to be potentially in a position where if he doesn't perform well enough at Sheffield, not only does he not place as well as he wants and get the money he wants, he might not get a spot on the world's team because he goes into that Carpino ranking system. Because if Ray wins nationals and hits the total, they've already got their one locked in 120 plus. So I think in the future, what we're going to see, Omar, is that the timing of the Sheffield and the way it is ranked may change because there are some, I would say, unintended consequences. I don't think SBD was like, what we should do? We should set up our schedule so that people skip nationals. You know what we should do? We should set up our prize pool allocation so that some people sandbag at international meets and don't set world records so they can save it, quote unquote, save that world record for Sheffield and have a better chance at making money. Those aren't problems. Like ultimately, this is like 95% only a good thing. The fact that Sheffield exists and there's these prize pool opportunities and that we're getting to see something equivalent to like what the World Games is for single ply.
Yep.
To have this opportunity, this invitational meet with literally arguably the 12 best men and 12 women at the same time is amazing. And I hugely applaud SBD for hosting the Sheffield. But I think there probably will be some brainstorming going on to figuring out like, all right, so where do we place this so it doesn't put, Powerlifting America athletes in a rough spot where they have to go nationals 5 weeks, Sheffield 2 months later, worlds. Because that's rough, 3 months later, excuse me, because it's, March and then June. But yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a schedule shift and there may even be a scoring change, although I actually like the way the scoring is, with it being a percentage over the world record. Because like right now, if you look at going back to the USAPL, like for their pro series, it's ranked on formula. And the formulas they're great, but I think people would much rather, like the more weight is put on winning a world championship gold medal in your weight class than getting best lifter at Worlds. And I don't know that there's ever been a super heavyweight to win best lifter at Worlds, maybe once or twice, but I don't have the stats on that. But it's very rare because the formulas typically don't give the supers the same weight because it's based upon the body weight relationship with weight. And I'm not sure it should be that way. But if you're thinking like a really good way to compare it, in my opinion, kind of like a Sinclair score or a Carpino score. Sinclair is in Olympic weightlifting. That's based upon how you compare relative to your field. Like if you're a far better, say, 76 kilo competitor and you win gold than the 84 kilo competitor on the women's side who also wins gold, then arguably you're a better powerlifter than that person. You know what? They just happen to be against a slightly weaker field and they were good enough to be world champion. You are 50 kilos ahead of the person behind you. You're arguably a better powerlifter. And that's captured by the way the Sheffield is doing it with how much over the world record are you to some degree. Because it also means that if there's a weak world record, then you can kind of be given an elevated spot. But what it produces, which is pretty cool, is if Jesus Olivares kicks a lot of ass, he could actually beat, Taylor Atwood, assuming Taylor Atwood's healthy, goes in and does really well. But we might see a super win the Sheffield this year on the men's side, which just doesn't happen for something like Best Lifter International meets, because Jesus is looking at maybe, if he has a great day, putting 30 or 40 kilos on the current world record in the 120 plus class, just as an example.
Eric, completely other tangent, but a question I just thought of as it relates to Sinclair and what we're talking about, how you compare historically to other people. in your class and so on and so forth, and that differential, do they take into account the population size? And I ask that just because, like, an 83 kg, the 83 kg class would be stacked. If we take a look at the average amount of lifters, let's say there's like a million lifters, and where do they fall, what bucket, and what category? Like, how many would be 83 kg, and how many would be super heavyweight? There'd be a lot more people participating in 83 kg. Thus, we can make the argument it's more competitive because there's just more people doing it. So a heavyweight, that's an outlier in that spectrum. So if there's, I'm just making up numbers here, but 83 kg, there's like 100,000 potential participants. And the super heavyweight, there's like 1,000 of them. The odds of someone standing out in it as a super heavyweight is arguably higher than the one that has 100,000, simply due to the fact that there's way more people in that weight class. So just a quick question for you. Does it take into account that, the formula? I assume it does, or?
It depends on the formula.
Okay.
So you brought up Sinclair. That's in weightlifting. The
Yep.
Sinclair coefficients is something you multiply your total by,
Yep.
and those are derived statistically, and they're adjusted each Olympic year based upon the total world records in each body weight category as of previous several years. That's very similar to the Carpino,
Yep.
which is the average of the last three IPF worlds totaled at one.
Yep.
And they have other Carpinos, like for example, in New Zealand, I think we're going with the Carpino 3. So we're a smaller country. We don't have as deep of a talent pool. So we're seeing, okay, what was the average of the bronze medalists total? Carpino 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yep.
You can go all the way down. Or Carpino 5. I can't remember. But anyway, you can have like a qualifier based upon Carpino 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, to answer your question about do they take into account the population variability, or I should say distribution of weight classes, because there's far more 83s and 93s on the men's side, and even 105s, than there are other weight classes. Likewise, on the women's side, you see far more 63s, 69s, and 76s than there are other weight classes, and it starts to drop off a little bit. Not as much as you think. I actually think there's a solid argument for having another weight class in women's and pushing the 84 plus up to something like 92 or 91 plus.
Yep.
Because the average weight of a woman, at least in North America, is in the 70 kilo range, if I recall correctly. And so like they were kind of right shifted. So ideally, you'd probably have one more weight class. Anyway, that's not true in Asia. So there's something to be said for that as well. But anyway, so what you're getting at, and what I think is important to note, is that if you go with Wilks, or if you go with Dots, or if you go with good lift points, it'll change. Even if no one's performance changes, if you look back on previous years, who ends up getting best lifter and the ranking of best lifters. So it is somewhat subjective, even though the formula itself is objective. You have to bake certain things into it. And the statistician who derives, the sports analyst who derives these things, they have to make some decisions. And one of those decisions can be, oh, I think this should favor the middleweights, which it often does. And I think the argument for that is sound. You're saying, look, for you to win the 93 or the 83 kilo weight class in the men's side, you're beating a larger field of people. There's more people in that weight class. So that's inherently more impressive than, say, winning the 59 kilo or the super heavyweight kilo weight class. The counter argument to that is, well, look, there's 90% of men are simply don't have the parents to where they could ever be a super heavyweight and even be anywhere near competitive. So there's somewhat of a genetic lottery just to be a 6'5" person who weighed 250 pounds their freshman year of high school, but wasn't even overweight in terms of body fat percentage, right? So it goes back and forth. And then some people can say, the spirit of the sport argument, for example.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the super heavyweight is kind of like the apex predator. That you'll hear that argument. It's a more intelligent, like, monocle version of there's no weight classes in the jungle, right?
Yeah.
but they're not 100% wrong. I got to give them that. Like, let's take it to, as we've talked about, like martial arts. If you ask, like, who is the best boxer in the world, you don't go, oh, that welterweight's pretty awesome. No, like, they're a really good welterweight, but you want to know who is the heavyweight world champion right now, because you know that if someone came up a weight class to fight them, and this is much more clearer, right? That because the sport is about who can win in the combat in these constrained rules. If you were to think about, okay, I'm going to have the welter go against the heavy, it's no contest, right? And it's the rare athlete who is so good that they can compete at their body weight and go up a weight class and beat somebody. And you occasionally see it in mixed martial art. You occasionally see it in boxing, and it requires special rules, right? And you probably know more about that than I do. It's kind of similar to saying, oh shit, like that 1 year at USAPL Nationals, Taylor Atwood almost totaled more than Russ Orhe, right? So it's like that.
Yeah.
And I think so you could make that argument, like, look, is he going to even be able to gain that strength? You just don't have the chassis for it. I personally, this is just my opinion, and it really is I like, it is all opinion. I think that you're constrained to a weight class based upon things that you can't modify to some degree, or at least to constrain to a few weight classes.
Sure. Yep.
You don't get to change your bone structure.
Right.
You don't get to change your height. So if you can't be a super heavyweight and you're competing in a sport and you have all of the other genetic talents that allows you to be that 74 kilo world champion, as an example, or that 66 kilo world champion, does that really make you a worse power lifter than the super? Like I said, this is my opinion. You can make an argument for it, but I personally, I don't really pay much attention to the like who's the best powerlifter cross comparisons. I think it's really interesting to see who is the best lifter in their given category.
Yeah.
Because the same thing could be said of the 59 kilo people. I can't make the 59 kilo class. It doesn't matter how lean or cut I get. Like, I could make it, but I would be in medical danger because I'm 6 feet tall, right? Like, I would have to have been starved and I would not be able to lift weights, right? So like, it's in some ways, it's just not necessarily a fair comparison. And we try to make sports as fair as possible, but it's not really fair. Like, what are we going to do? Correct for your genetics? Like, oh, the best total you can ever get to is 650. So your 650 is equivalent to Jesus Olivares totaling 1150. Like, no, it's not. Like, now we're actually don't have sport anymore. Now it's just everyone competing against their own potential. So ultimately we get to some very gray zones, and it is a very subjective argument. I personally think it's just interesting to look at who within each weight class is the best. And then I think, how much over the rest of the field are they? And that is the one weakness of the way that Sheffield does it. Like, if Leah Bavois or Taylor Atwood is super, super healthy and they go in and they can only beat their own previous world record by 0.5 kilos, they're going to be middle of the pack in terms of placing. But in reality, the next person behind them couldn't touch them no matter what.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like they're winning off of 5 for 9 in their weight class on a bad day with ease, right? So does that really tell you that like that's ranking the best lifters even as a percentage over the world record? Probably not. I think you would have to do something like a percentage over the top 5 in the world average total in the weight class or something like that. But, you could go back and forth on this forever, and you need someone like Greg Knuckles to talk to it, who's very good at math and knows the sport very well, to really come up with a good one. And we're getting closer to it all the time, but I think ultimately it's cool to see who can break the world record by the most. There are some limitations to it, but it's a lot better, than my opinion, than most of the formulas.
Completely, Eric. I find all this actually very interesting because fairness in sport is actually a far more complex topic than people on the surface would assume. And I think you just elucidated that perfectly. I would say, Eric, I will bring an analogy up as it relates to fighting, MMA, that I do think is apt within the context of powerlifting. And that is, I like to view powerlifting similar to MMA. There's no weight classes in the jungle, in that every single weight class kind of has particular qualities, and you must view it within that weight class in order to judge them. So, as an example, like super heavyweights, here's one of the variables: they don't cut any weight. And you might think to yourself, like, well, why does that matter? It's like, well, they arrive there fully formed, hydrated, likely their sleep is good. So, on average, all other things being equal, they probably have a 3% difference of arriving healthy, being able to compete. So we see them at their best, as opposed to there's a strategy with every other weight class where they need to cut weight, and that's a skill component. So now you remove that constraint. Okay.
Yep.
And then the other thing too, just to the general weight that one must be to compete as a super heavyweight, it changes the mechanics of certain lifts. So notice certain lifts are favored for super heavyweights as opposed to lighter weight classes. Like I forget who coined this that did make me laugh, Eric. I think it may have been my boy Walter, who recently competed at Nashville. So he took a swing at I think 830 at 105, at 231. He got I think he pulled in training like just shy of 800, so on and so forth. But anyways, I'm not going to quote him, but I'd say I've heard it from someone, maybe in the conversation, was that the lighter weight classes is like watching really strong ants compete in the sense that certain ones, and now it's kind of a funny thing that he said, they're like the deadlift, right? The deadlift will be disproportionately related to their other lifts, a large component of their total. So it's different how they choose it. The amount of people, as an example, when it comes to the pull, that would be skewed towards like a sumo deadlift in the lighter weight classes versus super heavyweight class. So all these things make particular qualities and choices within it that each weight class across the board is like watching a slightly different event. And that gives a richness, a variety of flavors that I think goes underappreciated. And that wasn't me, to your point, trying to say, like, well, actually, because there's far more people that would be 83, 93, 105, it's more competitive. So at the same time, as you mentioned, I find it interesting. You could view super heavyweight or as you would MMA in the sense that it's an open weight class, meaning that anyone can compete in that. Like if your total was really that good, was the best of the best, you could compete as super heavyweight. If they're competing at the highest level, no one else can compete at that. And weight is the large component that helps assist in that. But they're really at the top, and that's just one example. And then at
Yep.
the exact opposite end of the spectrum, the lightest weight class. Well, I would assume, depending upon other things, that weight cutting and those that could deal with weight management would be an enhanced or increased skill component that they would need because probably while they're still cutting a percentage of their weight, likely their willingness due to trying to suck down and be at that lightest, the willingness to be a little bit heavier percentage wise, not in an absolute sense. So say most people are 2 to 3%, 2 to 4%, that might be a 5 to 6%. And all these sound like very little numbers, but they all make a difference together. Lastly, Eric, Ben Rice. Ben Rice was this.
Ben Rice,
So,
yes.
so that was an interesting, and that was a cool time, Eric, because it was a matchup where I think Ben was pulling on a deadlift bar, and it was an internet conversation, and so on and so forth. That it was one of the first examples, someone that was just watching online lifters, where people could go head to head. So I think Sheffield, to get back to the point and talking about the whole concept.
By the way, Ben Rice has competed against Bryce Lewis.
Yeah, that was years ago, and Bryce won.
2018.
20,
2018. So in USAPL Raw Nationals, Ben did great. I think he totaled 840.
Yep.
And he placed fourth.
Yep.
And that year, Bryce won. I think he beat Ashton. So I want to say it was Bryce, Ashton. Oh God, I can't remember who placed third. But nonetheless, that he's absolutely been in the conversation. He's a very good lifter. David Wilson is placed. I want to say maybe fifth. There's always a lot of good 93s. Exactly to your point.
Yep.
So yeah, it's pretty wild, man.
And I think the only thing I would add to that, Eric, is that
Jonathan Keiko as well. So sorry, that was the 93s were really, really good that year. But like I said, sorry, Ben Rice was a 105.
Yep.
And as was, so yeah, I think I'm getting my 93s and 105s confused because both Ashton and Bryce have competed in both. So it breaks my brain sometimes. But anyway, Michael Davis, I think Michael Davis placed. I should shut up instead of just going through my memories. So Michael Davis, I think placed third. I'll figure it out one day. Ben Rice, Michael Davis, Bryce Lewis, and Ashton Rushka, I think in 2018 were your top lifters, but I could be wrong.
I think it's interesting with Sheffield, to that point. How do we make it so it's watchable for everyone and they can understand what they are viewing and what they're observing? I think it's like this. We can have that argument about the population, about what's the most competitive, but also there's the storyline because humans naturally focus on narratives. And the idea of having people to compete against becomes powerful. And I think it's just interesting the way Sheffield is organizing it. I wonder how the announcement is going to have to be on point. Because in another, competition, Eric, to your point, 93 against 93, real simple. Who's going to total more? This, like when they do the rankings and they're trying to, for both sides, where they're like, okay, well, this person is obviously they're a different weight class, so they're in absolute sense stronger, but they're trying to beat the world record. So it's always relative to what they're hitting. So that's gonna be interesting how that's displayed. But I would say ambition
Absolutely.
ambition this year, and I'll just cap off by saying for myself, it is reignited many different things within me this trip already. Fortunately, the elbow has been holding up. Training has actually been going well, but getting out there, interacting with people, like I said, seeing people do things at such a high level, like shout out to Joe Stanek, shout out to Tim, shout out to actually Silencio Mikel, who I saw him, like so many different examples. This has been a work focused trip, so I haven't even been making content or really being able to spend quality one on one time with some of these people. But like Alan as example, talking about facilities or just what people are doing either business wise, but I mean in service to the community. And I would emphasize that because I would put certainly Alan in that category. Mike with Third Street that I visited, but he has a 12,000 now square foot strongman facility in Sacramento that
Oh,
Eric has like
that's awesome.
literally everything. I think he has
Yep.
40 Atlas stones. And you just think about there wouldn't be a gym like that once again a decade ago. Mike, what do you call it? A Third Street Barbell where I visited there. Really cool atmosphere. It has like that Sacramento vibe. Just the thing like they have this like rusted kind of it's like a barnyard that they retrofitted and so on for the backdrop and everything else. All the little details, the power wash like on the floors and so on and so forth. And then getting into this game day barbell and just seeing like-minded individuals. I think what is cool about social media is that it is a place that allows you to meet up with other people and then you meet up in real life and people that have shared common interests. It increases that resonance that allows one to be pushed. Like I'm seeing a lot of these now. So let's call them more USAPL, I would say game day, but still also some like powerlifting American lifters. Point is top level lifters and you see those commonalities there, those
Mhm.
through threads where you see them with their squad, you see the way they get into their own personal motivation, either intrinsic or extrinsic, with the music, with the shouting. It doesn't really matter, but the people that are all coming together, and I found myself thinking because we talked about the mecca of over here in the West, which is a very interesting term for like a place that has
Yeah.
supreme importance. Which is why, like saying also implies there's one, and now it's kind of like goat where it's used. It's not greatest of all time. It's like really, really good. Where you say like it's the of the North, but I was thinking to myself, Eric, that if you are a lifter and you lived in Texas or whatever, this would certainly be one of the places. Not unlike if one wanted to be in bodybuilding in the 70s, you would seek out Gold's Gym, and now there's more of those places around the world. So there's a lot more to come in terms of my own personal journey. I understand that someone just started. They posted a video, Eric, because someone might be competing this year, and I'll be basically like when I've never done this before, and I never would skydiving, but you go skydiving in quotations, but it's kind of like the explorers, like the Western explorers, that climb like the Himalayas, but there's a Sherpa right next to them the whole way, like showing them the place, and they're like, "I did it!" And then there's a person like holding the camera who's actually the person that had all the requisite knowledge throughout years and years and years, the cultural traditions, and like acclimating to like the extreme elevation that like largely contributed to it. That's so I am the explorer, you're the Sherpa that's doing the actual work, that you're going to be getting stage ready, but I'm going to call myself plus 10 because whatever your body fat level is, like I'm in parallel. You understand this, right? Like you're 12%, I'm 22, doesn't really matter. We don't have to say that, but like we're both sucking down and getting succulent. It's just a
Mm.
different endpoint. But for yourself, my man, because I know this is a big year, not to say ages or anything. It's not that it's about that, but it's been now 4 years, 2019, right? Since your last competition, we're talking about all these things. And I don't want to be that person to frame it this way, but I will. Feels like everything's opening up again, Eric, and people are just really stepping out and seeing each other, and it is wonderful. But I know you have your own goals, and
Yeah.
that's a very interesting backdrop because you have your athletes competing, we're traveling, you're doing your thing again, and with every single time, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a new way you look at it or a new perspective because there's more years accrued.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So for those who want to do a little bit of a visual deep dive on this, you
Yep.
can check out the YouTube channel / Team 3DMJ. I just released my first of probably not that many prep vlogs because I'm terrible. Like like I think Jeff is doing it almost weekly because he's competing this year. Jeff Alberts, Berto. last year when he competed, he did it almost weekly.
Yep.
They're just more consistent than I am. I've just got too much going on.
Yep.
So it's like a 25-minute video. So perfect
Yep.
for if you want to kill your views on YouTube. So I will probably have, instead of like shorter weekly videos, I'll have like interspersed every few months, kind of like an update.
Yep.
But yeah, what I did is I went through in my video every single one of my lifts, like my current training setup.
Yep.
So all 5 days, and I also just talked about my general approach and my competition schedule.
Yep.
So I started prep officially. Geez, now I want to say I'm just finishing my 3rd week, and I was like 96 kilos at the start, and now I'm in the 92s. So I lost a whole bunch, kind of like bloat, like right off the bat. Which as you do, like from sodium going down, carbohydrate going down, losing water-associated glycogen, just less food bulk in your gut, and then less general water retention, and then also absolutely some appreciable fat loss. So with very quickly, I was like 94.
Yep.
So I probably lost a legitimate 2 kilos or 5-ish pounds or something like that in that range of fat mass. So in that video, you can see me going through all of my training, talking about my general approach at the start, my contest schedule. You can see kind of like my home gym. And
Yep.
for anyone who is training with relatively limited equipment, like I'm not going to make it sound like I'm hard out with a home gym. Like that's not, like, like
They're really struggling out there.
that's tough, man. I can only afford to buy my own gym in my house. Yeah. No, but I think the downside of a home gym is you don't necessarily have the same equipment spread that when you're paying to go to a gym on a regular basis.
Yep.
And I think I've done a pretty good job with what we have and my selections. So the second to last purchase I got was a hack squat leg press. That's both. Like
Yep.
you just basically take and put down the place where you'd put your feet for the leg press, and then there's a pads for it to be a hack squat behind that. However, you can also, in the hack squat position, this isn't like advertised as part of the equipment, but it's just perfect for my body geometry. I can do like a machine shoulder press. So I just kind of like bend over at the waist, put my one foot down kind of in the area where you'd sit and the other foot behind me. And it's a really nice feeling machine shoulder press. And you can also do calf raises on it. It's like a leg press with calf raise. So it's essentially 4 exercises in one. And that's really something that you have to think about from a space saving perspective. So I've got like a long 2-car garage basically. So it's the width of, a big car essentially. And I have a tiny ass car. I'm like a 06 Toyota something. I don't remember what it's called. The Vitz, I think. Anyway. And so that kind of parks in the front of my garage. And then I have a rower, which was my last purchase, because I knew it'd be good for me to have the opportunity to get cardio in when my step count's really low.
Yep.
It's just the reality of being a writer and an academic and a podcaster, as you spend a lot of time on your butt. Like I have days where my step count's between 7 and 10,000. I get 2 walks in and I'm active. It's all good. But I have other days where it's like 2,000.
Yep.
So on those days, being able to get in cardio will be good to keep a more homogeneous energy expenditure and just for health, honestly, just kind of long-term, even post-contest. So I've got the rower, and then next to that, I've got the hack squat. And then next to that, that's when the room gets a little bit bigger because it's a little narrow. And then there's this area to accommodate where the water heater is and like our washer dryer.
Yep.
So it spreads out a little bit. So then on the left, I have the Helico combo rack on the left. And then on the right, I have a dual cable stack that's also convertible into a rack. So
Yep.
it's cable stack. At the top, there's, a pull down. I have a dip attachment. And then I can do a bunch of stuff with the cables. And then I can also put on racks onto the front of the cable rack. So I can do, RDLs out of it, squats, etc. And then behind that on the right, like to the left of that cable stack, is kind of like where all of our general equipment is. Like, so my squat shoes, my deadlift shoes, my belts, BFR bands, and then to the left of that is a platform. So I have a lifting platform where you can deadlift or do Olympic lifts. We actually took part of the ceiling out for when I was Olympic lifting,
Yes.
so I could do it.
Yep.
Yeah. And then we have one other piece of kit, and that is a combination machine sissy squat / back extension. So you have this pad that folds out and you shift it to the left a little bit and you change where the thing on your ankles is, and you're doing a back extension. You shift it vertical, lower the pad, change where it is so it's on your feet facing the direction, and now you can do a sissy squat. So that sounds like a lot of equipment, and you're like, oh, great. But I think someone who has never had the creativity necessary to do well for bodybuilding in a home gym might think, oh, well, you're still lacking some things, like you don't have the ability to do leg extensions or leg curls, right? But you can. So in my video, I show how to do like a single leg extension, a leg curl using a cable stack. I show them how I set up a, like a seal row. I do a number of other, I think, creative things like the shoulder press on the hack squat. So I think that's hopefully useful. And then just the justification on what rep ranges I use when I don't train closer to failure versus not. I think it's hopefully instructional. And then at the end, I have like me just going through all my poses. So you can see me at what I think is, 20-ish% body fat. There was one question I haven't got to the comments yet, but there was one comment, someone you could tell was very analytical. And they were like, well, hold on. If you're 94 kilos now and you're 20% body fat, that means you'd lose exclusively fat. But what about water loss? And, and I was like, well, I don't actually know my body fat. It could be anywhere from 18 to 22.
Yep.
And you're assuming my stage competition is exactly 80 kilos on all days and it's exactly 6%. Yep. It could be anywhere from 4 to 7%. I don't actually know. Like, I'm not going to get dissected and never compete again because you die when you get dissected. And also, you don't just have this like obligatory water loss. Like, so 10% of adipose tissue is water. And then, skeletal muscle mass is like 75% water. But other lean tissue is a different percentage. So, and I probably lost most of my bloat anyway in those first like couple kilos. Like I said, going from 96 to 94 is probably like 500, 600 grams of actual fat. And the rest is food bulk and, glycogen and water that is lost from changing my diet. And I'll probably have another one of those kilos lost as I get leaner and leaner and lower in carbohydrates and less food bulk and lower sodium. But ultimately, I think we're going to see mostly fat loss, a little bit of lean tissue loss, but probably most of that won't be skeletal muscle mass. So yeah, I've got like 14 kilos to lose and I've got 7 months to do it, essentially. Competition schedule, I got September to November.
Yep.
So end of September right now is the tentative WNBF New Zealand show, which is a pro qualifier. I judged at it last year. This year I'll be competing. Then the plan is Battle of the Bay. That's October 14th in Cali in the Bay Area. So that show's typically in San Francisco. I'm probably going to go out and stay with Jeff Alberts. So he'll be kind of like my coach on the day there. And then the weekend after that, there is a Washington WNBF INBF Pro-Am that I could, depending upon how the last couple shows went, I might be getting on the pro stage with Jeff, or I'll be taking another shot at trying to get my pro card while Jeff is in the pros, which would be really fun to do together. And then I'll be going back to New Zealand, and in a couple weeks or a week later, I can't remember the exact schedule, end of October, there's WNBF Australia. So there's a new federation there. They're doing a great job promoting their shows. There's going to be a pro qualifier in Brisbane.
Yep.
So I'll go over there, compete, see if I can crash on my buddy Alex Thomas's couch, who's the head of the Sports Nutrition Association. And he hasn't heard about this yet, by the way. He's going to learn live on the air that I'm crashing on his couch in 6 months or 7 months or whatever it is. Do that. And then I have one final competition, and the goal is WNBF Worlds. So that's going to be in Seattle.
Yep.
That's going to be, I think, mid-November, if I recall correctly. And I could potentially be competing there as an amateur or pro, again, depending on how the season goes. The way it works, I think right now for 2023, you've got to place in the top 3 in the amateur division, unless it's a very small class, then it might be top 2. I'm not 100% sure on that to qualify for Worlds as an amateur. At least in the States, it might be different rules depending on the regional affiliate. And then if you turn pro, the year you turn pro, you can compete in Worlds. That's like your first freebie. And then after that, you have to do, I think, the top half in the pro division, although that rule changes sometimes. So we shall see. So pretty much no matter what, I'm doing Worlds, either as a final attempt to make it to the next level in the WNBF pro ranks, which I think is probably the most competitive natural bodybuilding professional division there is, or as an actual pro. So,
Eric, don't say final attempt, because what did we, and I think
final attempt of 2023, I should say.
Yes, thank you. Because as we know, and we've been given many examples, and I think that is a testament to natural bodybuilding, and the process therein, the years that it takes to accumulate an appreciable amount of mass.
For someone like me, at least.
What's
Yeah.
that?
For someone like me, at least. Yeah. Some
Sure.
people, they start lifting weights and they're already got the muscle mass they need to turn pro. So
No, but like seriously, whereas I think powerlifting does get a bad rap where everyone makes the joke like, "Oh, my joints will I turn 30 and it feels terrible." And there's so many examples to defy that. I do liken it, and it is because I am watching a lot of MMA these days, but many other sports. There's many examples like this. Football is a great one, where the average age of a football player when they retire would be X, and due to like either surgical interventions, rehabilitation techniques, training, new methodologies that they have, nutrition, everything that comes together coalesces to form like the strategy of the era, has allowed people to play for a longer period of time. Eric, in MMA as an example, when you're 30, when you hit 30, you're viewed as like, okay, like you're at the prime-ish, but you're at the peak and you're about to fade. Early 30s, you'd accumulated so much wear and tear, you wouldn't be able to, fight at a high level much longer. Okay, one of my favorite fighters, just a very specific example, Shogun Hua was his name, came from Pride FC, and he was only Eric like 27 when he came to the UFC, but he had already blown out his knees. He had broken his elbow against a guy, Mark Coleman. And so he was a shell of the fighter that he had been, and he was 20. Now he had started at 19, so years spent fighting certainly factor. Anyways, the current era of UFC or MMA, the average age of a champion is about 33, 34. And about
mm,
15 years ago, it'd be somewhere in the 20s, right? So I think that's a factor. But on the flip side, as it relates to natural bodybuilding, what's cool, just the way that it's approached and what is done, is that you can look better and better. Like imagine if a sprinter, as an example, just another sport, that people could still be sprinting at a top level in their 40s. So I think when we give the conversation and we surround it and we kind of center it on longevity, which I do think is a valid way to frame it. Like we both have, I'd say, kind of a bias towards that we're lifting for life. So,
sure.
sir, if there's one thing, like we joked, I joked about, I don't know, like not barbell medicine, the guys, but it's like your bias is towards a barbell, when you recommend things or
Mhm.
like certain movements or whatnot. Like I'm joking when I say that. Our one probably baked in bias in our culture is that it's for all lifters and that it's a longevity play. And that's our own conceit, granted. But I do like how that ties in with natural bodybuilding. So I can't wait, Eric, for you to actually really start the process where I think that asceticism, the denial of doing certain things will grant epiphanies that you can't force, that you have to undergo the crucible to then gain that perspective again. And then I remember you were spitting straight fire in 2019 was the year. So we're talking now 4 years later, episode, I'm making this up, like 35 that we had, that you'd be talking about these things. So I can't wait for that. And then the second thing and the final thing I'd say on that, I can't wait then when we travel because I am the temperature of the room, only of the room that I think has merit, such as yourself, in that I train with someone, I'll lift the weight that they're lifting or whatnot, the program, no problem. But I'm like, oh, that's your macros for the day, or that's for you. I'm like, no problem. Like, that's great. Like, that's great for me. Because you know what, Eric? You already calculated for yourself, and I just downshifted just like a little bit. You already look, we go to a restaurant, I don't have to think about anything. I don't have to like, oh, what are the options here? You're like, yeah, I'll have one, two, three, four, because this man's done it so many times. And I like to be on autopilot. It's a great time.
No, I think yeah, no, to your point, the process, even when you see a similar physique of what competitor in 2 years, the process can change substantially. Um, and that's another kind of cool thing that I like about sharing the vlog is just to show people how much my process has changed
Yep.
over time. Because, like you said, well, like some of those things come automatically, or you view it differently, or you make it easier. Like what I've done with, so some people were asking, like there was one person who's like, "Oh, what calories do you think they're at right now?" And the reason why they had to ask is because it wasn't that I didn't share that information. That's not the way I'm viewing it for this initial phase.
Yep.
So right now I'm starting, like I said, I started basically first week of February. And the approach I'm taking is just to make lifestyle modifications.
Yep.
And then once I get down to around 90 kilos, and in April, I'm going to go speak at in Mexico City with Alberto Nunez at the IAFF is bringing us out. It's a fitness education body. Great folks behind it. And I'm really pleased to be doing that. That's going to be a lot of fun. But anyway, at that point, when Berto and I meet up, he's going to take a physical in-person look at me and go, all right, let's get a little more structured, and we're going to follow a plan that we collaborate on together with, and I'll be your coach. Because at that point, that's when I'm starting to dig into where I'm slightly less objective and where I have to think about fatigue recovery and all that stuff. So I'll probably have calories and a protein target, a cardio, or like a step count to hit on a regular basis, and potentially cardio on top of that. Maybe not. We'll see. And I'll be kind of in that, the end run where I would like to have someone overseeing what I'm doing. But right now, until, what's that, 6 weeks from now, mid-April? It's, 25th or 26th of February as we record this, depending on what part of the world you're in, or 24th or 25th, rather. So right now, all I've done is just make swaps.
Yeah.
And this I think, is actually really useful for someone who's just looking to lose some weight and not feel it or not notice it.
Yep.
Because I think the mistake a lot of people make, and the reason why they end up losing the same weight over and over again, and it's not just this reason, but this is one of the reasons, is that they go through something that is a drastic change that no one would think is sustainable, and then they don't necessarily know how to keep off that weight loss when they go back to the way they used to live, which had them in a body weight or a body fat that they didn't like, right? So for example, what am I doing right now? Well, normally something that my wife and I do is we go on a walk in the morning to a cafe and we have breakfast together. It's kind of just like our nice little daily ritual. An example of what I might eat could be something like an eggs Benedict with smoked salmon. So it's got like hollandaise sauce on it. It's got, like probably more bread than I would need, stuff stacked on top. It's high in fat, but it's also got a couple eggs and some salmon, which is great. So it's got the protein there. So now instead of getting that, I would just get eggs on toast with smoked salmon, right? Or maybe even if I don't want smoked salmon, like 3 eggs. So it's a similar amount of protein, and it's still the same process. It's still the same qualitative experience. I'm going to a cafe with my wife and having a nice breakfast, and I might get like a side of spinach or something like that, or mushrooms. But I've now reduced the calories by 50%, easily, right? And then for lunch, I'm very boring. I always do the same thing. I have a, can of tuna, 2 pieces of fruit, a carrot, and a protein bar, right? Yep. That's not going to change because I just don't really eat much at that next meal. And then I train, and then I have, creatine and protein as a post-workout shake. And then I have dinner, another place where there's an opportunity for a change. At dinner, when the off season, especially when I'm trying to get my body weight into the mid 90s or even close to 100 kilos, which is I didn't get that heavy this year. I got like 96. But when I'm trying to get over 93 kilos, it's a slog. I'm not hungry. My appetite goes away. So things like pizza are absolutely on the menu. Things like Indian, which, as you know, is very heavy. And I'm rice, curry, on and on. Eat it it's just a big old bomb of fat and carbs, right? So those things are now just not in our rotation for when we do decide to eat out, and we're cooking at home more often. So huge cut in calories. And when we do cook at home, some of the things that we do are qualitatively different. So we often will have, we make burgers at home, we'll do Impossible Burgers or Beyond Meat. And then I'll have just a layer of feta, the size of the burger bun on the bottom. It's amazing, right? And then we'll have it with a sweet potato that we split, right? A big one. So now, instead of the layer of feta, I do light Laughing Cow, which is almost nothing, but it's just, it's another 150 calories off each burger because feta is a lot and it's a big chunk. And then instead of a baked potato, we'll just split broccoli, right? So there's another, I've cut 200 calories out of dinner on when we do that. And when we make curry at home, now I'm using half the rice. So easy, instead of a full cup of rice that we split, it's a half a cup of rice. And instead of halloumi, which is a relatively high fat, cheese that we use with it, we'll switch to paneer, which is lower fat, higher protein. So that's easy. And then finally, when I go to bed, I always have Greek yogurt before bed, but now I'm just having plain fat-free Greek yogurt instead of Greek yogurt that has, fat and carbs. So to an outside observer, my day-to-day process is nearly exactly the same, but I've just made these swaps, and it's nothing I have to think about. It doesn't feel different, and it won't feel different until I get to a point where I'm lean enough for the actual caloric difference to be there. Because in terms of the mechanical satiety, the actual room it takes up in my stomach, almost exactly the same, increase in vegetables, decrease in carbs and fat. And another thing I'm doing is that on days, like I mentioned earlier, when I'm not getting the couple walks that I have planned, I knock out 10 minutes of rowing. And on days where I do get it, I just do 5 minutes of rowing. And it sounds like nothing. Like doing 5 minutes on the rower before I lift weights, you could just call that a warm up. Some people do that whether they're cutting or not and don't think about it as cardio. But if I wasn't doing that previously and now I do it and I train 5 days a week, now I've added at the very least 25 minutes of cardio. And then on the days where I'm not actually getting my step count, another 5 minutes. So 25 to 50 minutes of additional cardio that I didn't normally get. That's not nothing,
Yep.
you know? I'm not going hard on the rower. It's like on the 0 setting or anything like that. It's really just calorie burn. And that has been sufficient for me to drop from 96 to 92 something in 3 weeks. And again, that sounds like really fast weight loss, but 2 of those kilos was just like immediate bloat in one day. So, yeah.
No, Eric, I'm going to love this parallel series that occurs. As we maybe revisit it, and there'll be episodes where there'll be particular topics. But I do think as a window prism into understanding some of these concepts. And I like what you said, where you do sometimes I just want Eric to ball out though, where I know you're always thinking of like the public good and like the utility for the listener, and like, well, here's a way of framing it for you, because of course, like there's very high chance that you will not be competing on stage like this year. But the way that you can think about the start of it, I'm like, I like all that. But what's going to be so cool for me to observe is I met up with you in 2019 when you competed. And that year was arguably, as you said, it was like the easiest prep by every conceivable metric. And I'm curious how this one is going to go. I think you're going to absolutely crush it. But just again, those other insights you gain, how you feel about the whole process now that you're in a slightly different phase of your life. Like every few years, like people like to think that they're this, constant, and instead that they don't change in small ways that are hard to really analyze. And sometimes I like either revisiting for myself a piece of work, a piece of art, like a movie, a book, or whatnot, and me reading it, like my opinion on a piece of great art says more about myself than it does the art at all. So it's almost like a reflection that I'm looking at. So like going through a process again, like if you're doing a meet prep or you're competing again or whatever it might be that you've done at other time points along the way, it's just a really cool way of framing your own existence. I'm not trying to make it sound deeper than it is, but like, this 2023 one, and now we are post pandemic, meaning that you'll be traveling. There's no restrictions in terms of traveling. So you said like Brisbane, where you'll be going there, like Sheffield, you're going to be like in America, this and that. So it's like the old Eric schedule, because I know due to just the commitments, like the
Yeah.
popularity of one Helms at like speaking engagements and so forth. You're also going to be traveling, and that whole variable you have on like lock, where that could be something for someone else that's an issue. So I know there'll be a lot to discuss in the future, and it's I think very neat just to bring it up to start to the audience that this will be probably one of, if there's many journeys in agriculture that we drove together, stuck together, this NAD or a competition, someone's preparing for a competition. This is like the Eric 2023 march towards the next level. So I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of opportunities for failure too. So for people who are, you don't like racing but you like to watch car crashes, like stay tuned. So I didn't. Can you believe, Omar, that 2019 was 4 years ago?
Blows my mind. Yeah,
It doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
So for one, interesting things this year. I'm turning 40.
Yep.
So that means I can compete as a master. I'm not going to do that in bodybuilding, but I will in powerlifting.
Yep.
And I'm trying to compete as an 83 M1 powerlifter this year in New Zealand, where if I can maintain even like 95% of my total, which would be like a 30 to 40 kilo reduction in my total,
Yep.
I would do pretty well at least the Auckland level, if not the national level. Just kind of looking at like, I think the current record in the 93s is like 585 or 600 or something like that.
Yep.
And on a great day at 93, I can total like 630 to 640, right?
Yep.
So anyway, that's something I'm doing. I can tell you that having been around the block for a while, like bodybuilding and strength sport don't mix super well. And I don't mean generally, like as training, absolutely 100%. Competitive bodybuilding and strength sport don't mix super well, because you're getting, I talked about like most people can compete in like, 2, maybe 3 weight classes.
Yep.
I could probably compete in the 93s or 105s healthily, but the 83s, Me at 83 is a warm-up show, or if I was to do a classic physique competition. Like, I'm really lean
Yep.
because that's only
Oh,
3
yeah.
kilos off my stage weight.
Yeah.
Um, so the goal is to get to like 85 by June, and then water cut to 83, and then do like North Island Championships. And that's right before I go to Malta. So like water cut and then travel to Europe after competing. So like it's possible like I'm just going to get massively injured by
Oh,
April and that's it. And I'll just be doing like BFR for the rest of the prep
no.
and going, I really shouldn't have tried to powerlift. So that's one possibility. That's one opportunity for failure for those who like to watch car crashes. Um, the second one, Omar, is just that I am actually trying to look different and better. And it's possible that I'll look basically the same as 2019 and not have improved, despite the fact that I stretch my calves for 6 hours a week. And I'm still awaiting some the final analysis from Kai, who is not only doing our timestamps, but he's also kicking ass in his masters and he did the ultrasound for our case study on my calves. So if there was actually some good gains from stretching, then I'm going to start implementing not the same volume, but some stretching into like for all muscle groups into my prep. So to hopefully make something happen to my muscles in case the lifting weights for the last 4 years did not do enough. But I think when I was looking at my posing video, I looked pretty thick. And like normally, so previously, I think when I'm 14 kilos over stage weight, I just look like a guy. Like I don't really like I don't look like a bodybuilder. And I was like, okay, actually I look reasonably thick, and I think it might be the best I've looked at this body weight. And again, this might be just subtle things that only I can see. I don't even think it'll be a difference in terms of my stage weight, but maybe just some little qualitative difference, better symmetry. I've worked really hard to bring up my back and my shoulders and my calves just to try to make me look less spread out, as a 6-foot kind of narrow frame dude. And yeah, I was looking at my posing video and I'm like, obviously I'm not in shape, but that's okay. Like I look relatively symmetrical. Like normally my back looks a little under and I only look decently thick from side shots. And I was like doing okay. So there's a possibility that when it all comes down to it, and I'm not, like pumped post workout and, 33 pounds over stage weight, or whatever the hell I am, that I'll, look exactly the same as 2019. And it is what it is. But yeah, it just means maybe I need to do something different or more effortful in the off season, stretch everything all the time while training 7 days a week. I don't know. Or I just need to stop trying and just accept that this is the max out physique. So we'll see. Will I devolve into physique nihilism? Will I make marginal gains? Will I hurt myself? Will my calves look any different this year? There are so many things to look at. Or will the travel schedule that I've set forth, now that I'm 40, just destroy me? Even though in 2019, when I was a young buck at the age of 36, 37, I was totally fine. So 2019, I spoke at I did the European Powerlifting Conference. I did the Ultimate Evidence-Based Conference, which is only in Melbourne. It's pretty close to me. I spoke in multiple places all around the year and did all around the world through that year and did a lot of travel, doing the same thing this time, but basically for Iron Culture. So you'll get to see me repeating that process, and I think that'll go fine. I'm pretty good at being adaptable, and I think that's something that I proved to myself in 2019. And yeah, so the kind of the new angle this year is that I'm turning 40. There's an opportunity for me to try to combine strength sport in the same season. It'll be basically before all of my shows. Nationals, I want to say, is in August. So it'll be like June, August. And then my first show is in like September, if I recall correctly. So I might be doing, I think at the very least, I'll be able to be reasonably strong for North Islands, but it might be that my strength has gotten like worse before the qualifier, and I don't want to go to do nationals and I did worse than I did for the national qualifiers. It might just be one meet. We'll see. But nonetheless, there's going to be probably 5 bodybuilding shows, at least 4. And then like I'm committing to 4. Like obviously New Zealand and Australia, they're close to home. I want to do Worlds, and then I want to do one with Jeff. But if there's 2 that are right there in the, within close proximity, the Battle of the Bay and the Washington show, and I can just stay at Jeff's place, like why not to spend an extra week in the States when I'm already there? So probably 5 shows, which is a lot, but they're all within like a 3-month span. And then as far as powerlifting, there might be 2 meets. So it'll be interesting to see. I've got the dates for both let's see, I'm looking at the APA 2023 calendar. Yeah, so the 3 lift nationals will be probably down in Christchurch, and that's 6th to 10th of September. So shortly after that, I would be doing my first show of the season. But I would be like trying to get on the platform to compete at nationals while I'm 3 weeks out. I don't know if that's a good idea. So
You framed it like a Dragon Ball Z episode. Will Eric make it out alive? Will he get injured? Will the stretch-mediated hypertrophy work out for his calves? Find out in the next episode. Let me just
that's
say
right.
one. I think you're highly adaptive. You've proven that. So I'm not worried about any of those things for you. I also find it amazing how you're 6 feet, you're tall, glass of water, tall drink of water. And yet this man tries to suck himself down to compete at these godforsaken weight classes. You have the proportions. Like when everyone Googles like fitness physique, it's a statuesque physique like yours, where you have, and I know you're like, I don't have a tiny waist, but you have like tiny waist. You got like good shoulders, great proportions, good height. And this motherfucker is trying to like, he's like, no, I mean, I got deltoids in the back, we got to bring it up here. And it's like, man, we need some perspective here. Because Eric, let me tell you something. Bringing up the ants again, and I sound like a hater, folks. I'm 5'9", okay. I'm a giant at game day barbell at these powerlifting gyms. I was surprised, and this is what I mean when I say like the specialty, and we're getting back to the different weight classes, like to be serious for a second, where there's different considerations like height, morphology, the weight cut, the super heavyweights, like what movements they'll do. But like you see how specialized people are.
Uh-huh.
Eric, we're like I joke when I say that, but that's what he said about bodybuilding, and then you try to do 83 in the intersection between high level bodybuilding, getting down to that level of leanness, and then peak performance in powerlifting, how it's not really a thing. And man, I'm seeing like I won't name names, but let's say I've encountered already in my week and a half between California and here, probably 15 athletes that are within the top 10 of their respective weight classes, either USAPL or Powerlifting America. And you know some common trends. Like you just look at like, oh my God, your arms are actually pretty long for your body there, buddy. It's like, oh, it's like, or another individual, I'm like, oh, your femurs are pretty short and your torso's pretty long. You probably have a pretty good squat. So you see how people like we're getting that specialization coming in. So Eric, that's all. That's not me trying to, rationalize anything that you said, but bro, I think you can do great in your powerlifting meet. I think you're going to look fantastic, and I can't wait to see the progress.
So like real talk, Omar,
Yeah.
just to show that I'm not just like being either overly humble or purposely or I'm just like insecure and don't have real perspective. I do understand how my physique and my strength are relative to like the field,
Yep.
which comes from hopefully just having the reasonable mental health and then also being involved as a trainer and a scientist for so long.
Yep.
So like real talk, if you were to look at the distribution of open 93 kilo men in open powerlifting and where do I fall, I'm probably in the top 25%,
Yep. Yep.
So I'm strong. For powerlifters, I'm strong. But there's a big difference between being competitive in powerlifting and being strong among the entire field of powerlifters.
Yep.
Like me at my absolute peak best, if I total, let's say, I don't know, let's say I go all in on powerlifting, I total 670 at 93, maybe, and somehow my neck doesn't explode. 670 at 93 would not place me, even in a small country like New Zealand, in a position where I could qualify for Worlds. And if I did somehow find an off year in 93s in New Zealand and I actually qualified for Worlds, I would place probably in 15 or lower, right? If they would even send me. They would probably, in fact, they wouldn't send me. What they would do is they would fill out other weight classes where people were more competitive. So that is a good total, but it's just simply not what people like. The 93s, there's going to be somebody hitting over 900 soon.
Yeah.
It might happen this year.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 230 kilos more. That's an entire lift. That's like if I had 4 lifts, I could be competitive. That'd have to be a pretty big fourth lift. I don't even know what it would be because it couldn't be an overhead press. I wouldn't get there. So I understand like that's like I'm squatting 500 pounds. Like obviously I didn't even know that I didn't have that capability. Now the real talk portion is that in bodybuilding, I'm absolutely not world class, but I do think relative to the field, while I'm not that muscled and I don't have the perfect bodybuilder's physique, which is basically 5'6", short arms, broad shoulders, I do have a pretty physique, and I understand that. And I think I probably can get a pro card, and I think I can do okay in the pros.
Yep.
Which, what is that the equivalent of in powerlifting? It would probably be like placing in the top 10 at Worlds.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And being a shot at being a national champ in a smaller country. So I am aware that I'm doing okay for myself in bodybuilding. And I think I'm somewhat more motivated in bodybuilding to fulfill my potential because I think it is something that is a little bit further. So even myself, as someone who's like, oh, lift for life, be balanced, is you versus you, I have a little more competitive drive in bodybuilding because I have the opportunity to actually be competitive at a reasonably high level. So I think that's something I'm very aware of. I don't take for granted, and I don't want to like downplay where I'm at, because it used to piss me off when I was coming up as a bodybuilder or as a powerlifter when someone would be like, for example, we early on in Team 3DMJ's history, when we were more about just trying to promote the sport and interview athletes and talk to other drug-free lifters rather than being like a coaching company, like I'd compete in a meet total like 1,200 at the 220 weight class, because that's where it was. And the guy who totals like 1,500 in a weight class lower, who wins the best lifter award, he's like, oh, I'm just getting started. And like it's like, how do you think that makes me feel? Like,
Yeah.
like you weigh 15 pounds less than me and you total 300 pounds more than me. Like if you're just average, just getting started, does that mean I should just like shoot myself? So I think it's important to have like kind of this dual perspective.
Yep.
Like appreciate how far I've come from where I've started, and just the general, hey, this is pretty cool. And maybe, really much more attached to just yourself and the progress you've made. And then a separate, less important, but still something that if you're a competitor, you go after, how am I relative to the field?
Yep.
And then you're going to hear language from athletes that is specific to that. Like, when you hear top IPF champs or powerlifters, like, oh, he's got like almost sounding slightly disrespectful to someone who is, 10 kilos under the world total. Like, oh, they got nothing on me. And it's like, well, I mean, they're the only, like you're the two strongest people in the world. He's got something on you. Like, come on, like, I think it's just important to remember the framing. Yes. And elite sport is, it's pretty wild when you get to the point where you're talking about these genetic outliers with 20 years of training under their belt. It's just kind of, it's hard to fathom unless you've coached or competed at that level.
No, I like the idea of the dual perspective, and we will be revisiting that. I do also think, like, we're just joking, that you have a very healthy perspective, and I think that's why it's important, because a lot of things are experiential. Like, you have to go through it, and that's why I said, I forget what we're talking about, but I asked you, it's like, do you think that if you read everything about a meet prep, that you could accurately predict how you would feel and what it would be like to actually go through with it? So I think, as once again an avatar of an experience that a lot of people might not do, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I mean, compete at bodybuilding, compete at a high level, like whatever. There are still lessons that then you can bring back down a scale and then apply. So no, man, I am just excited, and so we're like a month out from Sheffield. I can't wait to not think about what I have to eat. I'm like, I have what he's having. That's just ends up, I have what he's having.
Let's get shredded by proximity.
That shredded by proximity is the movement. Because I'll be traveling. I'll probably with you like 4 or 5 weeks this year or something. So it's like that's enough. That's enough for me to get one.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a fair bit. Yeah. So I know we shouldn't talk about it too much, because then it feels like we're committed to things that may or may not happen. But we've got the Sheffield locked in.
Sheffield, folks. Austin.
And so yeah, I mean, Sheffield's not just Sheffield though.
Yeah.
So Sheffield's not just Sheffield though.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going down to Southampton. We're going to be at Solent University. We're going to be doing some scientific interviews. That's on lock. Sheffield, we're interviewing some of the top athletes. We're going to be there in the competition. I'll be coaching. That'll be really cool. And then we're going to hook up with almost the unofficial like third host, because
Yeah.
none of us are historians, but Connor Heffernan
He's the man.
of Iron Culture. He's the man out in Ireland,
Yeah.
where we're going to get to see some stone lifting, the oldest gym in Ireland, and obviously just get to pick his brain and talk to Connor about the history in Ireland of physical culture, which would be really sweet. He's going to be coming out to Sheffield to see all that with us. He's a huge, he's competed in bodybuilding, and he's a huge fan of strength sport and the history and the culture behind it. So that's only one trip.
Yep.
But exactly, we got Austin.
Yep.
We're going to be going down to the University of Austin at Texas, and going to the Stark Center, where it's the biggest repository of history. Connor has initially said he would go there for us, so he can help navigate that space, as he is the true historian. And Malta. I know you're not committed to it yet, and I understand because you got a lot going on. But maybe you're out there at Worlds, where I'm potentially coaching both Jess and Bryce at Worlds. I'm going to have a heart attack. It's going to be amazing. Very cool.
You can get a beautiful tan though. So like Malta, I heard, is amazing.
I mean, I won't need it because I'm going to have fake tanner on very soon. And something about contest prep, I don't know if it's nutrient deficiency or just your body's like, you know what, I don't have energy for producing any melanin. You're going to be super white. But everybody gets pale during contest prep. Well, everyone who's white. Yeah. I mean, or at least not super dark, because Berto gets pale.
Yeah.
Like I got him a belt back in the day with on the back, it said the Ivory Latino, because when he would compete, he would be super white.
Yeah.
But then you get that man some sun, and he's, caramel. So, just like yourself, beautiful, beautiful men, you both are. But I'll get back on track before I get too hot and bothered. So anyway, like, there's that trip, and then I'm also planning to come up to Toronto, and we can maybe take a trip down to maybe Stu Phillips' lab, maybe see one of our prior guests, Lauren. She's towards the end of her PhD, so we have a lot going on. And if all of those trips happen, it would be incredible. Even if half of it happened, it would be pretty awesome, and we're going to get a lot of footage. So yeah.
Shredded by proximity is like going to be my motto for 2023. I love it. I actually love it.
And we're going to hopefully possibly try to get you out for the other Worlds that I'm competing at, WNBF Worlds in Seattle. But I understand that's a lot. Yeah, that's November. So we're looking at 4 Iron Culture trips, which is it's a lot.
I think part of what it is, and this is the last thing I'll say, that it is just not trying to sound like poignant or anything. That there's been many things over the last, even pre-pandemic, that you have aspirations and they might not happen. Like, I wanted to open a gym, and my timeline was a year, and that was 2018. So now it's 5 years later, and we do not have a gym. And even like the pandemic certainly put a complete halt to that. But we looked for 2 solid years. And so sometimes I think, and that's what the theme, like I half jokingly said about like ambition is the theme of this one. Like, it's good to want to strive for more, and that within the right context and the right reasons, so on and so forth. But then also being okay with the different permutations of fate of what can happen. And so in general, and someone told me this, I don't know, it was maybe around that time, because I was overcommitted, and now I've been focusing on less commitments, but ones that I actually can and give the proper time to. That if you can't commit to, think if you can commit to now, we say, oh, it'll be a year from now I could do it, but could you do it right now? Someone, I don't know, it was like some punk that shared a story about getting, which I love. Okay, eggs Benny with holiday sauce with smoked salmon. I don't know if I was meant to be made jealous or if this is intel you found out, but anyways, I think that's really important. But at the very least, we'll be doing a bunch of trips, and I'm very excited for the call with the all the content and the things that we'll be doing and the things we'll be sharing that I think will be a unique insight into the space that we all love. So I'll wrap it up there, Eric. What do you want to say, my friend?
No, it's just like the classic saying, you shoot for the stars, and when a global pandemic happens and you have financial failure and you never leave your house, you're still satisfied.
You learn something new. No, I think I want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of Iron Culture. There is much more to come. You could go ahead and leave a rating and review on iTunes. It does seem to help us out in the rankings, but don't feel obligated. 5 stars is typically the rating that we get. We have that 4.8, which, as someone said, they like to brag about their 4.8. I'm like, I'll be honest, like, that's a good rating though. So I'm gonna rate that's a 96%, go ahead and leave a rating or review, and we'll catch you in that next episode every single insert date here.